Yeah, we missed Buddy on that. Look at him. He's sitting on the front row with his hands. He doesn't even know what to do. You miss the bass when it's not there, that's for sure. How many of you remember the first car you ever owned? Raise your hand if you remember what the first car was. Well, mine, I didn't own it, but the first car I really drove was my mom's car. It was a 1970 Chevy Nova. It looked just like this one, blue and white. I was allowed to put an under-the-dash 8-track tape player in there and bigger speakers. The first car I actually bought was a 1974 Toyota Celica GT. This is my friend Robbie Kimbrough took me a picture of me in front of his house there. The first car Jana drove was a 4-door Ford LTD. The colors were tan and rust. Now I asked my mom what was the first car that her parents ever had, and she said it was a late 20s Ford Model A like this. She said when she met my dad, he was driving a car like this. No wonder. Got her. So what was the first car you ever had? Just a couple of you. Just what was the first car you ever had? Anybody? What was it? 69 Volkswagen. Yeah, Steve?
66 Pontiac Catalina.
Any females remember the first car? Firebird, yeah. Chevy Camaro. That is a pretty good kind of muscle car. Anybody else? Yeah, Doug? What was it? Oh, Cutlass. Yeah, Diane? How much? $50. Yeah, Aubrey? Firebird. All right, well, they say that the average passenger car engine these days turns about 3,000 revolutions per minute, or 3,000 RPMs. But racing motors can turn up to 10,000 RPMs. And unfortunately, that's about the pace that some of us try to live our lives these days. You know, you leave the house or apartment in the morning, and your days are a series of nonstop activities. Work or school, meetings, appointments, errands to run, kids to pick up. You finally get home, and of course, the house is a mess. Dishes need to be done. The garage needs to be cleaned out. Lawn needs to be mowed. Oil in the car needs to be changed. And on top of that, there are books that you need to read that you haven't gotten around to yet. Future planning that needs to be done. These days, 66% of Americans say they would like to slow down and live a more relaxed life. 40% of us describe ourselves as always feeling rushed. Now, of course, we tell ourselves, you know, one day, life is going to slow down, and then I'm going to have time for the really important things. Don't count on it. The older I get, it feels like my life is just whizzing by. In a book entitled Time Flies, the author says there are 7 stages of life. We go from preschooler to Pepsi generation, baby boomer, midlifer, empty nester, senior citizen, and finally organ donor. Now during the 80s, there were a lot of books published on time management, if you remember that. There was one popular one called The 1 Minute Manager. You can just do everything in a minute. Followed by The 1 Minute Father, there was a 1 Minute Teacher. There was even one entitled The 1 Minute Lover, which I'm not exactly sure if that was a big seller or not. Doesn't seem. Anyway, but that's been the continuing pattern in our culture. Get up earlier, cram more in, get more done, multitask. It's as if people are trying to get through their life as fast as they possibly can. And a question that rarely is asked is faster really better? Because when you think about it, there are some serious negative side effects of busyness, like how it affects us relationally. We don't have time or don't feel like we have time for maybe people. And sometimes they sense that we're too busy for them. It affects us emotionally because we just skim over the emotions that we should be experiencing and considering. It obviously takes an impact on us physically. Stress takes a huge toll. Spiritually, sometimes even God gets squeezed out of our busy lives. Recently, I read in a Christian magazine, they asked people, what is the biggest obstacle you face when it comes to growing spiritually and really following Christ fully? You want to guess what the #1 answer was? Busyness. Don't have time. So here's all the spiritual potential. You know, people who are far from God who could be reached, poor people who could be served, prayers that could be prayed, worship that could lift people's heart up to connect with God, Christian friendships that could enrich their lives, children that could be having nightly devotions with their parents, Bible truths that could be learned and so change our lives. But those things often don't happen because we're too busy. Just because we've allowed our lives to become cluttered up and filled with other things. Well, today is the 10th and final week of our series, That's My Favorite Verse, and we're looking at Ephesians 5:15 today, which says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise." One of the best books I've ever written along this line of being aware, being intentional, wise in how you go about your life is entitled The Tyranny of the Urgent. And in it, the author, Thomas Hummel, divides up many of life's activities and responsibilities into 4 parts. Now here's a little grid. It may look a little complicated, but I'll try to explain it. It's really not that hard. Quadrant number 1 are the things that are both urgent and important. Like, for instance, your house is on fire. That's important and it's urgent. You need to take care of it right now, right? Someone is having a medical emergency. That's urgent, that's important. Maybe there's a deadline at work. Or your car is just broken down along the side of the highway. All those are urgent, they're important. Quadrant number 2 are things that are important, but not necessarily urgent. Like getting an annual physical checkup, meeting with a financial planner, having a date night once a week with your spouse, or making sure that you're living out what you say are your main priorities in life. Those things are important, but not necessarily on fire. They're not urgent. Box number 3 are things that are urgent, but not truly important, like most phone calls, most meetings, interruptions, doing things at the last minute. And 4 are things that are not very important or urgent, like being on Facebook, watching internet videos, going through all your junk email, viewing mindless TV shows. Now looking at this, can you guess which quadrant Ephesians number 5 applies most to, where it says be careful, be smart, be wise in how you live? I think it's box number 2. You see, the issues in quadrant number 1 you have to deal with those. They're sort of thrust upon you and you have to take action. Now most of us spend a lot of time in quadrant number 3 issues, and again, they're right in your face. They demand your time and focus. And then it's mostly either laziness or just downtime that puts us in box number 4. But living wisely, living purposefully requires living a more disciplined life sometimes. That's what's found in quadrant number 2. We're going to come back to that just a little bit. But I started off with cars, and today I want to talk with you about cars and about your life being like, one of those cars out on the highway of life. Now maybe 50 or 100 years ago, the appropriate analogy would have been golf. Life was like a leisurely game of golf. Today it's like a highway, a racetrack, like NASCAR. For those of you who make any kind of commute to work and back, you've seen people in a hurry, right bumper to bumper with the car in front of them, get out of the way. They're on their cell phone in one hand and Egg McMuffin in the other hand. They're switching lanes at a high speed. They're nervous, they're stressed out, people swerving in and out because they just can't wait to get that elusive checkered flag, wherever that is. And you may be one of those people. And if so, I have 3 simple recommendations for you to do. Number 1, when you're on the highway of life and you're feeling stressed and you're just going crazy, number 1, sometimes you got to pull over and stop. It's going to take something more radical than simply slowing down a little bit, probably. You got to pull off to the side of the road and stop. One time Jesus told a story about a guy who had fallen victim to some thieves. He'd beaten him up, robbed him, and left him for dead on the side of the road. Then it appeared as if his luck had changed that day, because he looked up and there was a priest who was walking right by where he was. But instead of stopping to help the poor guy, the priest just kind of stepped over him and kept going. Now there's an interesting little fact here that Jesus says the priest was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now Jerusalem, of course, was where everyone went to the temple to worship. In all likelihood, the priest had just finished up his work serving God in the temple, and now he was making the short journey walk back to his home in Jericho. Now most priests are people of love and compassion, right? And yet this guy was so preoccupied so busy that he was somehow desensitized to this poor, bloodied guy there. And that's one of the things that always being in a hurry can do to people. It desensitizes us. It desensitizes us not only to the cries of the needy and the poor, but sometimes to the cries of our friends or our spouse or our children. A study was done of people who are 95 years old or better, and they were asked, if you could do your life all over again, what would you do differently? Their number one response was that they would have stopped and soaked up each moment. They would have cherished the people and the events of their life more. Maybe you've heard the expression that goes, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift. That's why they call it the present, which means sometimes you have to pull over, you have to stop and unwrap each moment. Be in that moment and experience the people you're with. Experience that sunset or those feelings or whatever it is, because when we move too fast, we miss out. And a lot of times we're going to look back and regret that we tried to go through life so fast. Second recommendation is look under the hood. Sometimes pulling over and just stopping isn't enough. On occasion, you also have to pop the hood and look inside and see what's happening. Now, as you may have heard, I am pretty mechanically challenged. Only one time in my life did I ever change the oil in my car myself. It was with that 74 Toyota Celica GT. I remember it was right outside of our house in Miami by the kind of the alley there on our driveway, and I took the oil, whatever that thing, the drain, the drain, what's that called, plug, out, and the oil came out, and I put 5 fresh quarts of oil in there, and then I drove off. In less than a block, the car was smoking, the dashboard lights were going crazy. Guess what I had forgotten to do? Put the plug back in. And so those 5 quarts of oil, they just went straight through there. Fortunately for me, the engine didn't actually burn up, but it was a close call. Therefore, that was the only time I ever changed the oil in my car. Now, in the old days, if you had any familiarity with mechanics and stuff, you could open the hood and go, okay, well, there's the radiator, and there's the carburetor, and there's the spark plugs or whatever. Nowadays, you open it up, and it's just a bunch of computerized parts. And I don't know what you do with that. But life today is not only a lot busier than it used to be, but it's more complex, just like these engines. You remember what TVs used to look like, right? Boxy, heavy, not a very good picture. So finally you made your way down to Best Buy, and there before you were an infinite array of options. Big screens, flat screens, projector screens, digital, plasma, LED, LCD, whatever, analog, HD, Blu-ray. It's overwhelming when you do that. You meet with a financial advisor, and they go, well, you can put your money into the IRA or the Roth IRA or the money market account or the stocks and the bonds and the hedge funds and the mutual funds. You got to, diversify your portfolio. And some of us are like, wow, I don't even know what those terms mean. This is not good. And John Ortberg writes, the truth is, as much as we complain about it, we are drawn to hurry. It makes us feel important. It allows us to avoid looking more deeply into what's really going on in our lives. So part of the answer or solution is to be very careful how you live your one and only life. Not foolishly, not haphazardly, but with wisdom. To focus on that which is truly important, not that which is urgent and seems important. Sometimes you have to pull your car off the highway of life, pop the hood, and take a real honest look inside. Ask those probing questions like, what makes me idle so fast? Why is there always this undercurrent of stress or anxiety in my life? Like the engine's just running, high RPMs. What am I doing? Am I doing the regular maintenance needed to keep my life running smoothly over the long haul? All right, that leads me to the third recommendation, and that is change lanes, and change lanes on a pretty permanent basis. Make a conscious choice to move from the fast lane into the slower lane of life. The Bible puts it this way: don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold. Just because other people are overscheduled, overcommitted, and overwhelmed doesn't mean you have to live your life that way. But you know, making a change, a significant life change from busy and complex to slower and simpler is not easy. Life experience tells me that most people will only achieve this as a result of extraordinary circumstances. Kind of like if you know your battery's old, it may not start all the time, your alternator's been acting up, your radiator's been overheating. As long as your car will drive, you just keep driving it. You don't pay that much attention to it. However, if one day you go out and your car won't start, or worse, you break down along the side of the highway somewhere, well, now you realize you've got to get that work done. In a similar way in life, someone's coasting along, cruising control, until maybe, if I can say it right, until they're on cruise control, until maybe, you know, they get the answer from the doctor they didn't want to hear, you know, something devastating. Or maybe their boyfriend or girlfriend, you know, breaks up with them, or maybe they go through a divorce, or they lose their job. And then all of a sudden, it's like they're broken down along the side of the highway. Most of us don't pull over and stop all on our own. Most of us will do so only when forced to. Most of us will only pop the hood and look inside if we're forced to. Most of us will only move from the fast lane to the slower lane in life if we're forced to. Now, from the time I got out of college until about 13 or so years ago, I was one of those cars racing down the highway of life, swerving in and out of traffic, passing all those stupid slow cars, stressed, tired, tachometer in the red. Now, after we had kids, I knew I needed to slow down. I wanted to slow down so I could, you know, be there, be the kind of dad that they needed me to be. The problem was I felt like I was in a situation or a circumstance that just required and demanded so much of my time and energy. And so by the time I got home, I didn't really have much in the tank left for Jana and the kids. And I felt bad about it. I mean, I genuinely wanted to change. But how could it? I was stuck in the madness of this fast lane. I just couldn't get myself out. Well, like I said, like most people in the fast lane don't pull over on their own. I was no different. Thank God he finally forced me into the change that I desperately needed. Now, I'll spare you and myself all the details, but my life kind of got turned upside down, inside out. Not so much by my choice, but more by the working of God's Romans 8:28 magic, that he can and he will take all the circumstances, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns of life, and somehow, someday, some way, work them for our good. Now, there was an important decision that I made in all this. I chose to take advantage of the opportunity that God gifted me with. Now, I could have cursed the fact that my car was involved in a head-on collision that left me nothing but a pile of crumpled metal and broken glass. And to be real honest, I did curse the fact that that happened. But I use Christian curse words, like heck and darn, most of the time. Also, I could have said, by gosh, as soon as that damage gets fixed, I'm going to get back out on that highway life, and I'm going to show everybody. I'm going to race, I'm going to stress, I'm going to swerve, I'm going to pass everybody and go faster than ever. Instead, somehow, by the grace of God, I recognized that that crumpled car might have just been a great blessing in disguise. I couldn't see it at the time before the accident or the time of the accident, but I needed to pull over and stop. I needed to look under the hood. I needed to move into the slower lane for the sake of my kids, sake of my marriage, sake of my sanity, my health, sake of my relationship with God. So what about you? Where are you right now on the highway of life? Would it really be helpful for you to pull over and to stop? Maybe before things break down and get worse. Maybe you need to pop the hood, and look inside. Turn off the radio, turn off the cell phone, just stop and slow down and listen, for instance, to the words of Jesus in Matthew 11, where he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened and stressed out with life, and I will give you rest. Learn from me, Learn to live a better way, and you can find rest for your souls. You know, sometimes we just need to pop that hood and take an honest look inside and say, what is really the condition of my heart these days? What's making me desensitized maybe to people? What's making me too busy for God? What kind of fuel am I putting in, both physical, mental, spiritual? Am I putting into my mind, my body, and my heart? Are your tires feeling kind of low and deflated? You need to get pumped up, back to full strength again. Don't allow the tyranny of the urgent to dictate how you live your one and only life. Focus on quadrant number 2. Set up that annual physical checkup. I do it every year around my birthday. It's easy to remember that way. Schedule that meeting with maybe a thriving financial advisor. Set and keep that date night with your spouse. Find an exercise routine that will keep you healthy into the future for as long as you possibly can. Spend meaningful time with your kids, with your grandkids, with your aging parents. Those are things that we regret if we don't do. Commit to a daily quiet time where for 3 minutes or 15 minutes or some period of time where you pray and you read your Bible and you just focus exclusively on God for just a little bit of time even. I mean, what would be wrong with one night, 1 week out of the month to turn off for just an hour, turn the TV off for just an hour, one night of 1 month for 60 minutes and invest that time into thinking about the things that we're talking about today? One thing I have find mind-boggling is a lot of people these days will spend more time planning a single vacation than they will spend in an entire year thinking through and reflecting on and working on things like what we're talking about today. They'll spend more time preparing a single Thanksgiving meal than they will in the entire year of defining and clarifying their purpose in life and making sure they're on track with living according to their purpose and priorities. They'll spend more time watching a movie, 2 hours, football game, 3 or 4 hours, than they've spent in the past 10 years reflecting on and thinking about what's going to happen to them after they die. We got to be smarter than that. We have to be deeper than that. We should be wiser than that. All right, let's stand. We'll have our closing prayer. If you can, I hope you'll stick around for our potluck and talent show. We'll see how that goes. We might need a little help with moving some chairs and tables, so if you want to do that. But otherwise, you can head out this door, that door, whatever. Go out in the lobby, get some food, come back in, and we'll have a good time. All right, let's pray. Lord, I hope that what we've talked about today can impact the lives of those who most need it. All of us need it. But most need it because they're living their lives just day by day. Weeks go by, months go by, years go by, even decades go by without us really reflecting on what is the purpose of my life. Am I becoming the more loving person that I want to be? And what could I do as a husband or a wife, that would make my marriage better? What could I do as a mom or dad or grandparent? How could I be a more loving friend? How could I be more Christ-like? How can I get rid of this anxiety in my life once and for all? The things that are so important in our lives. But I pray we would take the time soon to devote a chunk of time to reflecting, getting counseling, reading the Bible, talking to friends or loved ones and saying, help me to identify the changes in my life that are needed, to be the kind of person that I want to be, to honor God more, to walk with God more closely, to have a better family, to do better financially, whatever it is. Lord, right now we want to thank you for the food that we're about to enjoy, and it reminds us, God, of how you provide for us so generously, so faithfully. And so we thank you for the food, and thank you for this time together. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, everybody, thank you for coming today. We'll see you next week.